Welcome to the Global Supply Chain Marketing Group, a professional development webinar series designed specifically for supply chain marketing professionals and those that are responsible for driving the growth and revenue of their organizations. This program is brought to you by Supply Chain Brain Media. Hi, I'm Ralph Henderson, the executive producer and your host for today's session. Our topic today, the truth about Gen Z. Why do I care? If you've ever rolled your eyes at headlines declaring one generation entitled, another lazy, or yet another impossible to manage, you're not alone. The problem with generational stereotypes is that they often distract us from what really matters. Understanding how people communicate, build relationships, make decisions, and contribute at work. In an industry where talent, collaboration, and innovation are critical to success, those insights can be a significant competitive advantage. In today's session, we'll explore generational differences and why they matter, what drives the behaviors and perspectives of each of those generations, and how those differences impact the workplace. You'll walk away with practical insights into relationship building across generations, a stronger business case for understanding the generational dynamics in the supply chain industry, and strategies for reducing friction while strengthening collaboration between Gen Z and generations they work alongside. Joining me today is Hannah Ubel. She's going to be leading the discussion. She is the co-founder of the Good Consulting Company. With more than a decade of experience, she studies the generations, she studies the workplace culture. Hannah has advised organizations like Cisco, Boeing, Kraft Heinz, and Gap. She's also the author of Managing Millennials for Dummies and The Future of Work is Human. Please join me in welcoming Hannah Ubel.
Thank you so much, Ralph. Hello, everyone. I am thrilled to be here talking to people in supply chain about the truth about Gen Z. I have had the opportunity to work in the supply chain space for many, many years. It's how I originally got connected to Ralph and built that relationship. So I'm glad that I can be here now talking about Gen Z and giving you some insights into how to build relationships across generations, how to communicate across generations, and of course, why we should care about this. That's also especially important. A couple housekeeping pieces. If you have questions, please put them into the Q&A function in this Zoom. I will be taking a look at those questions. If I do not get to any questions, if we don't have time at the end to answer all of them, don't worry. I will be getting them. I will be receiving them. You will get your questions answered. There's also a chat function. Please, at any point, I'm going to be asking you some questions. So when you have an answer to my question, type it into the chat. Think of that as the more interactive tool throughout this session. And then if you have any specific questions, type those into the Q&A. Okay, housekeeping done, out of the way. Let's talk. So we're talking about change. Whenever I talk about generations, I just like to say this is a way to talk about change, and change is a constant. If you think about it, when we talk about technology, and oh my, the changes that have happened in technology, from that generational perspective, even if you think for just a moment, what was the cool new technology when I was growing up? Like, what came out during those preteen, teenage years that just changed the game as far as communication, connection, creativity? So, if you look at this slide specifically, we have different evolutions of that technology. So, we have the fax machine, and that at a time was the biggest game changer you could possibly imagine. And then, of course, we have the computer. And this computer on the screen is an older computer, but at that time, these computers, they made a massive difference in work. Then, of course, we have the internet. That is something that I can't imagine working without the internet. I don't know how people did that, but there was a time. Then the internet comes on board, technology, you think about phones. And of course, right now we are using this wonderful digital presentation platform that didn't used to exist. We didn't used to be able to have meetings in a digital space over things like Zoom and Teams. And it's completely changed our communication expectations and etiquette. So that's one change. Of course, AI is in every single conversation. I read some reports about what's going on in supply chain right now, what's going on in material handling. Of course, AI is at the top of the list. So I will touch on this today, but it will not be the focus. People. Now, this is where I am going to focus. People are changing, and the generations of people at work are changing. So, right now, we're at a point where Gen Z is going to make up 30% of the US workforce by 2030. And right now, Gen Z, they outnumber baby boomers in the workforce. And in speaking with people in the supply chain space, I know that there is data out there that says that Gen Z is the biggest population of workers right now in the supply chain field at large. So it's critical to really understand who are the generations that are showing up at work. In certain industries, we're going to feel these generational shifts in different ways. If we have a whole sea of leaders who've been leading in a certain way, and then they shift out of those leadership roles and another generation takes the helm, it's going to be a different way of leading, motivating. We have a whole new crop of people rising in the workplace. We want to see them thrive in this industry, and we need to know how to lead them. So there's a lot of different components here at play. And let's get into it. Let's talk about what's going on in supply chain. So I mentioned, there's reports out there and they are listing as the top challenge, talent acquisition and workforce challenges. I'm not an expert in your fields. I am an expert when it comes to talent and people at work. And I will tell you that this is something that we've been hearing from every industry for a long time. For the entirety of the years that I have worked in the supply chain space, I have heard we have to think about what we're doing around talent. The fact that this is still a top consideration, there are so many reasons for it. One of them is understanding generational nuance. When we better understand all of the different generational shifts, all the generations that we are working with, we can really shift, change, adapt how we are appealing to, recruiting, motivating, engaging all of that talent. And if you too think about the relationships that you are developing with customers of different generations, it will change the bottom line and your success as well. So if you think to this supply chain talent perfect storm, there's this article that it's on the horizon. Now I'm going to draw everyone's attention to the date of this article, 2016. That means for 10 years, we've been talking, even this is just one article, right? Like 10 years, it's been this perfect storm. Okay. This is still a top conversation piece. The silver tsunami. This was a huge topic of conversation because of how many baby boomers were going to be leaving the workforce, and with them went their knowledge, their relationships, their connections, their know-how. Here's the truth. They're still feeling, many people I speak with are still feeling the effects of this silver tsunami. So the clash between generations in supply chain talent, another headline, another report, we're now in 2023. It's still happening. Okay. So you're probably like, Hannah, I get it. Like people are talking about generations in supply chain. And I am just pointing this all out to you because it is essential that we think about generational differences. And in your role specifically, and what you are doing is as marketing professionals, It's so much about relationships. And whether you're going to trade shows, whether you're picking up the phone, the idea of learning about generations is so that you can really improve upon those relationships for the rest of your career. So it is that power of relationships that go above and beyond the trade show. So hopefully some tips today about the generations will help you in those relationships. So let's get into it. Let's get into the generations. Here's how I'm approaching the rest of our session. We will first talk about the humans at work, the generations. Then we will deep dive into Gen Z. And then we'll spend a bit of time talking about next steps and what your accountability plan will be. Okay, so let's talk about these humans, us wonderful humans at work. When we talk about generations, many times people want to know what are the three things that no matter what I can do across generations. And I will tell you that those takeaways, they're built into this presentation today. Don't worry. However, awareness of what the differences are and why, this is really half the battle and knowing how to bridge generation gaps. And this is not about putting into people into boxes or painting a really broad brushstroke. This is merely a lens with which to see the people that you are communicating with and connecting with. Okay. Now, breakdown of the generations. It goes by birth year. If you're born between 1928 and 1945, you're part of the silent generation. Born between 46 and 64 are the baby boomers. 65 to 79, Gen X. 1980 to 1995, millennials. And Gen Z is 96 to about 2010. If you are between two of these generations, you will see some slightly different numbers depending on the source that you are looking at. This isn't a hard and fast, like, this is hard science. Like, that's not how generational sociology works. We're studying patterns and trends. And so if you're between, like, if you're like, but I'm born in 1980, does that mean I'm a Gen Xer or am I a millennial? Well, you are this whole other category of an in-betweener. You, if you're born between Gen X and millennial, are a zennial. If you're between Gen Z and millennial, you are it's a mouthful, zillennial. So if you are between two generations, you typically easily can go between both. You are this generational translator because you always see multiple perspectives. You actually have this really wonderful place in the generational conversation. So I want to point that out just because I feel like oftentimes people feel like they don't solidly belong to one because they were born on the cusp. And if you were born on the cusp, you're still part of this conversation. Okay, on this session, I am extremely curious who is here. So I'm going to have you answer this poll question of what generation you belong to. Do you belong to the boomer generation, born between 46 and 64, Gen X, born between 65 and 79, millennial, born between 80 and 95, or Gen Z, born between 96 and 2010? So take some time, enter in what generation you belong to. And if you are curious, the generation after Gen Z is Gen Alpha. I just assumed that we wouldn't have any Gen Alphas on the session today, but I always just like to let people know. Okay, so the mix that we have on today's session, it looks like majority is Gen X, and then we've got Boomer. We have a little bit less on the Millennial and Gen Z side. Sounds good. This is great. If you're listening to this session later, I take into account your own generation. So we do this just to know who we're in the room with. It's really helpful to know. And I always say, don't assume someone's generation. It's best to ask their generation. Um, and I also want to point out too that when we do this breakdown, so you see it in years, it's also about what you experienced when you were growing up during your formative years. Think of them as your teenage years. You're starting to think differently than your parents. And what happens during those years has a massive impact on how you view work, how you might view the world, how you behave at work. So those big events and conditions that happen in your formative years, that shapes distinct generational identities. And these events and conditions can include things like the economic climate, social upheaval, pop culture, parenting trends, technological advancements, and were you when moments. So I'm going to ask you right now to use the chat function, and I would love for you to type into the chat function. And I would love to know when you're thinking of where were you when moments, like those really big moments that just defined your generation. Please type that into the chat so I can know. It will help me as I speak to each generation just to know your own personal experiences. A really common example of this when I talk to baby boomers is they might talk to me about when man landed on the moon and how that was such a big deal. So it's those kinds of moments. Think about what those are. And to that end, I also want to say too, life stage is important when we talk about generational differences, just so we know. But just keep that in mind with some of this. Okay. Now, when we talk about generations, speaking of, those events and conditions, you might look at this icon on the screen and I want you to think like, what was this? What is this to you? Now, some of you are probably like, Hannah, duh, that is a floppy disk, okay? And some of you might say, I know exactly what kind of floppy disk that is. Others might look at this and say, that's the save icon. Okay. Other people have told me, Hannah, that's bunk beds. Take it as you will, interpret it as you will. Now, I'm also curious. I want you to ask yourself, okay, and you can let me know in the chat too. Have you used this yellow emoji in your text communication at work? Have you ever used this yellow emoji? So someone said yes, always. All right. I'm going to give you a bit of insight on this emoji. So the yellow thumbs up emoji, while to many of us, and I think, if you're the person who's using this all the time, this for many times is like, yes, understood, heard, absolutely. That's what I want you to do. Like that's all it is. It's like, got it, understood. Here's the thing. Younger generations, a yellow thumbs up is like, okay. It's a passive aggressive thumbs up because it's like, really? You couldn't even take the time to change the skin color of the emoji. You couldn't give me an actual like typed response. You couldn't actually let me know what you really think about this. It's just like a got it. Um, it has a different meaning to different people. It's part of the generational etiquette, if you will. Okay, I'm going to show you one more example of this. Now, this is an email that a friend of mine sent to me, and she got it from her boss after a really long project, and she sent it to me because she was extremely nervous. Here is what the email says. Good work today, period. We'll talk more next week, dot, dot, dot. Thanks, period. Now, some of you might be looking at this and you're like, great email. That's so nice. The manager, the boss, they took time to send this email. How wonderful. Others of you might be looking at this and thinking, that is a rough email. Good work today. Okay. Here's how my friend saw it. Good work today. Why wouldn't you say great? Why wouldn't you say amazing? Excellent. Fantastic. Best thing I've ever seen. We'll talk more next week. Dot, dot, dot. That dot, dot, dot means there is so much left unsaid. Like you are including the dot, dot, dot because this is a message of doom. Like I am getting fired next week. And then it's ended with a thanks, period, not even an exclamation point. I mean, it's just essentially, I am a failure. I did a really bad job. My manager is mad at me. That is how my friend experienced this email. Now, some of you might agree with that feeling. Some of you might be thinking that's the silliest thing you've ever heard. Why would you react that way? Here's what happened. My friend went into work the next week and her manager gave her a promotion. It was actually a very good email. But what was happening is that she was reading this email, taking this message in through her own lens of how she would have written it. She was operating by the golden rule. Communicate with others, treat others how you want to be treated. how you want to be communicated with. And while this is good in theory, in practice, it gets us into these moments of miscommunication all the time. What needs to happen instead is operating by the platinum rule. So instead of this golden rule kind of mindset, we need to be thinking about the other person and centering their experiences. That is the platinum rule. And so when you are thinking of building relationships across generations, it's going to require constantly being in that platinum rule mindset. Now, this is one of my three big tips that I'm going to be sharing with you in this presentation. They seem simple in theory, but they're harder to execute in practice. So, my number one tip for you, like tip number one, is to build relationships across generations with the platinum rule. Stay curious. When you stay curious, bridging generation gaps is so much easier. It's easier said than done. Okay, so to get into this, the nitty gritty a little bit more, we're going to go through each generation. I'm going to give you really practical tips about how to connect with each one. And then again, we will close out with next steps. So let's get into baby boomers. Now I'm going to play a sound that's probably very familiar to the baby boomer generation.
From Washington, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.
Good evening.
Okay, so the most trusted man in news. I think everyone can remember, at this time, Walter Cronkite, and the evening news was 30 minutes. There was a time when it went from 5 minutes to 30 minutes, and that was a huge deal. That 30 minutes, it's like this was the voice that we were listening to. Now, baby boomers who are here, if you can too, please type into the chat where were you when moments. So I had you kind of think about those earlier. I saw some different things coming across. So Kennedy being shot, that one comes up a lot. A moment of fear, a moment of, oh my gosh, what is going on right now? I mean, I spoke to one boomer and he said it was the only time that he saw his dad cry was when Kennedy was shot. It was this real moment for a lot of boomers where they saw some vulnerability from their parents, where maybe they started to question what was going on in government, like what's happening? How did this happen? Why did this happen? It was a really, really momentous event for so many baby boomers of all ages. I also talked about man landing on the moon. And if you think this was a time too of winning the space race, like this was a huge deal. And there was such a sense of pride, such a sense of accomplishment, optimism. Like look what we did. We put someone on a rocket, human beings, and shot them out onto the moon and they landed and they walked. Like I can't imagine what it would have felt like at that time to experience it. Now, when it comes to work, one thing that's really, really important to understand about boomers is the sheer size of this generation. When they were growing up, there were tons of them. It's in the name. They're the baby boomers. And that meant in school, there weren't always, I've heard, enough books. There weren't enough desks. And it wasn't the time of, hey, you're a really special human being. Okay. That was not the message that boomers heard. They were told different messages, right? Like, you're better seen and not heard. That was more of a message that they were hearing. It was like, yeah, go figure it out, make your way. Okay. So when baby boomers went into a work environment and they're seeing all of these different people that they're competing against, and they're entering environments like this, a hierarchy, an org chart. There's a person at the top, and that chart, it goes down very, very structured. Half of the men of the silent generation were war veterans, and then they went into work. And the communication style was top down, command and control. When the boss says jump, you say, how high? For a boomer to succeed, it was show up before the boss gets there, leave after the boss leaves. If someone says to be on time, you show up 15 minutes early. There is never a time that you would say no to a question from your boss. You would always say yes. Boomers are the generation that's known for having an incredible work ethic, and they would put in 20, 40, 60, 80 hours if they needed to in order to be successful, because that was really the requirement. So when we think about this generation and we think about some of their characteristics that you're going to be seeing at work, yes, they are competitive, okay? They can be idealistic. They tend to be loyal to organizations. You're probably talking to boomers, you're probably working alongside boomers, maybe some people who are dialed into this session right now who have been in their workplace for a long time. And if it's not that they're loyal to the institution they work with, they are loyal to the people they know. They know people in this industry. They've been working with them for a while. They respect authority and they are highly relational. Like when I think about a generation to look to who knows how to build relationships, I think about boomers. They're going to know your name, your kid's name, your dog's name. They're going to remember what vacation you went on last year, even though you haven't talked to them in a year. Like they remember. So, if you are connecting with this group and communicating with this group, first, punctuality, preparation, that is a form of respect. And remember, punctuality, being on time, be early. Okay. That's just kind of a general rule of thumb. Show up a little bit early, and that's going to be showing up on time. This was more a general rule. Think we didn't like boomers didn't have cell phones to call people and text, hey, I'm on my way. Like you had to be where you were supposed to be at a designated time. That is the expectation. Also, again, this is an influence of having that population of management who are coming from a more military background, which is highly structured. Okay, so thinking about that punctuality, thinking about that preparation, if you are going into a conversation with someone and they ask you questions, have everything prepared. If you are following up after meeting someone for the first time, make sure that how you were following up, have a couple bullets of what you talked about, have some links to further information, package that information so everything that they need is right there in that email. The one line kind of email for this generation, it isn't as successful. In general, if you're working with them, no news tends to be good news. They don't need constant updates about every single thing that you're working on, or they don't need to be constantly told, you're doing great. They're like, yeah, I know I'm doing great. I'm good at my job. Like, I don't need you to tell me. Also, remembering personal details, it goes a very long way. Again, this is part of relationship building. This is the old hack of writing information about people on the back of a business card and having it in your Rolodex. It's important. It's really important to know people, to authentically be building relationships. And my final tip around here is that it is truly all in the details. Boomers tend to appreciate details. Everyone does. But to really make a mark, make an impression, to show up, to, say like, hey, I remember all these pieces. I know what you care about. So I'm going to package a solution for you that you care about. I'm taking work off of your plate by thinking ahead and being proactive. These are tips across generations, but I do like to highlight these for boomers. Okay, we've got to get to all the generations, so let's keep moving. And remember, any questions that you have, pop those into the Q&A function. All right, Gen Xers, you might recognize this sound.
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
Okay, so I actually was in a meeting earlier this morning and someone referenced this without me even saying anything. This was a very, very common sound that Xers heard. It was broadcast for all the parents of Gen Xers because they were left alone a lot, which we are going to talk about. So Gen Xers, born between 1965, 1979, and someone typed into chat, and there's a image of it here as well. But, we talk about moon landing for boomers. For Gen Xers, a huge momentous piece that defined this generation was the Challenger explosion. And many Xers can remember, the TV was wheeled into the classroom, which typically meant this is going to be a good day, right? And they remember sitting down because there was a teacher on board, and then they saw the explosion. And for a lot of Gen Xers I talked to, they're like, it was so scary. It was like, what just happened? What's going on? What just happened? And they were looking to teachers to explain what had happened, but the teachers couldn't explain it. They were looking for the news to give them answers when they went home. They were looking for their parents to give them answers, but they couldn't get any. And so this idea of this, amazing institution, they started calling it into question. They're like, wait, but if I can't trust NASA, who can I trust? What can I trust? And you have to think too that this generation, they were learning how to function and do all these things on their own. So that sound that you heard, so when I talk to I'm thinking of the best way to explain this. When I talk to Gen Xers, they'll say to me, Hannah, I don't know if you understand. My generation, we were kicked out of the home early in the morning. Our parents would say, go, don't come back until the lights come on. And then we were feral. We would do things all day long. Our parents had no clue what we were doing. We were getting into so much trouble. They were just spending so much time alone. It's like, we want water. That's what the water hose is for, right? Like, this was what defined this generation. They were constantly figuring out time on their own. This is the latchkey kid generation. You go home with the key around your neck, let yourself into the house. What that means as a cohort is Gen Xers tend to be extremely independent, so independent. They're like, hey, you know what? If you want something done right, just do it yourself. When it comes to group projects, they're like, ooh, do we have to work in a group? How about you do your stuff? I do my stuff. And then we come together and just when we need to, not during, just when we absolutely have to get things done. That autonomy for this group is essential. Their decision-making process, they don't mind doing it on their own. So that independence is a really key piece of who they are. Also, if you think about sink or swim culture, if you get in, it's like, okay, just figure it out. I'm not going to explain things to you, or I may have told you once how to do something. Now go figure out how to do the rest of it. That is a Gen X culture that they came up in at work. It also tends to be how they manage, how they lead, how they communicate. Now, they also grew up with a poster that was a cat hanging on a branch that said, hang in there. This was motivation. And I don't get it. Xers try to explain it to me. They're like, cats land on their feet. And I'm like, yes, they do. I don't understand how it's motivating. But to a Gen Xer, they're like, hang in there. You got it on your own if you need to be on your own. Now, it's also a generation that was raised by media. The TV was the babysitter. News wasn't 30 minutes, it was 24 hours. And of course, there was music television. In Canada, it was much music, much music. There was just like this constant media being brought in front of this group. And part of that media were infomercials. So there's a picture here of a Ginsu knife that is cutting through a can. It's like this stays razor sharp. It can cut through cans. It can cut through shoes. It was like these amazing knives, these amazing things like the ab roller that gave you a six pack. Here's the thing, that ab roller had to be recalled. Many of these promises from these products ended up not being true. So there's this skepticism that is baked into the Gen X generation. I always like to say, with a room full of Gen Xers, if I ask them and they're like, we're all here, there's majority Gen Xers right now in this session. What I usually say to them is, you're not going to believe anything that I say. And then they usually laugh. They're like, correct. I'm not going to believe anything that you say. And I know this usually happens because they grew up in a time where so many institutions were called into question. NASA, as we talked about, politics, politicians, Milli Vanilli. I mean, all of these different people, institutions, things were, and these infomercials, they're like, who can I trust? Me. So they learn to push back. They learn to poke holes. They learn to ask questions. They're constantly searching for the truth, and they can sniff out if that truth is not being communicated to them. So as a whole, independent group, skeptical, efficient. They might have a little bit of a cynical sense of humor, and they are results oriented. Now, connecting with them, because they're so independent, they also have a lot going on. Just get to the point. They don't need an email with a bunch of bullets. They're like, just tell me what I need to know. You don't have to tell me what's great. Just in and out quickly as possible. No frills, no sugarcoating. Marketing and selling to this group tends to be get in, get out, give them what they need to know, and move on. Autonomy is everything, as I mentioned before. So be sure that you're providing them with the information and then get out of the way for them to make the decision. They do not like a hard sell. They do not need it, but they want to know someone is there who is an expert when they want to call on them and they want to go right into those questions as soon as possible. Okay, that's Gen Xers. Let's get into millennials. Millennials, a sound you're familiar with. My gosh, I can't even listen to the whole thing. I don't know about the rest of you. I have heard that sound so many times in my life. Millennials, especially the older ones, I'm on the older spectrum of millennials, probably remember like rushing home after school and you'd be like, Mom, get off the phone. And you would go down, maybe if you had a computer in your house and you're at your friend's house and you were like, we're going to go in chat rooms and we're going to log on to AOL and we're going to do instant messenger. The internet, though the beginning of the internet was a wild time if you were a preteen or a teen. And that's what millennials grew up with. Technology was a huge part of their generation, like everyone before them. The where you were when moment for many people, they'll either mention Columbine, and they'll talk about school shootings and how it was really scary, but it wasn't something that, Gen Z is thinking of in the similar way now. There weren't lockdown drills for millennials. Um, and 9/11, for many millennials, they can say, and I was just with a group of people, and they were like, "Oh, I remember where I was. I was in seventh grade. I was in English class. I was in geography class. I was driving to school with my dad." Like everyone remembers where they were. And for many young people, it was the beginning of, for many of them thinking, whoa, what does this mean for our country? What does this mean if we go to war? They're talking to baby boomers about the draft. They hadn't really done that in all serious fashion before. So it was a really serious, very real where you were when moment for millennials. Now, also, this is a generation of digital explorers. And exploration is an important word here. So we're thinking Napster, LimeWire. We're thinking about the old Nokia phone with Snake going into AOL and those chat rooms. Like everyone was figuring out the internet, including young millennials who are just trying to get online to talk to friends in their lime green Comic Sans font. Like this was a part of who they were. But if you think about what that means for work, I'm going to draw your attention. There's an image on the slide of the evolution of the cell phone. The evolution happened extremely fast. What was normalized for millennials growing up is that change happens all the time. And it happens for good reason, and it's constant innovation. So millennials really appreciate innovative approaches. They appreciate change. They want to be part of the conversation of change. In a workplace, they want to know, when are things changing? When are things improving? How are we going to continue to level up? So when people say something like, well, if it isn't broken, why would we fix it? That is like kryptonite to a millennial. They're like, are you kidding me? Just because it isn't broken, that just means someone hasn't looked at it in a really long time and it's going to break tomorrow. We need to fix this today. Also considering that, this is the generation that started with social media, like MySpace, when you had to code to use it properly. It was a very different time. So there was a lot more work put into all of these technological spaces, into social media spaces. So it's not a generation that is necessarily going to need to use all these social platforms or text. They might prefer more in-person communication and connection. That's fine. But I think sometimes people think like, oh, millennials, they're the most like, they want all the technology. Sure, but also millennials are in their 40s, so like they also still like phone calls. So just something to kind of remind people of. Sometimes millennials, people, I think it's like, oh, they're 25. It's like, we're not anymore. We definitely are not. Okay, also the self-esteem movement took off when millennials were growing up. What this means for you. First of all, the participation trophy. Yes, these were given out more to millennials than any generation in the past. Not by each other. Millennials didn't give themselves the participation trophies. I do always like to point that out. It was older generations giving them to millennials. Also, research has shown that getting awards around effort actually instill more of a growth mindset. So there's more of this feeling of, I want to try. I want to just see if things will succeed. And so what will happen is that you'll see this, the younger generations tend to have a lot more energy to try new things, or maybe something's been tried before, but they want to try it again in a new way. And older generations, more experienced generations might look at that and be like, but why? Why would we do that? This isn't going to work. But that energy around it partially comes for millennials, that comes from this self-esteem movement. Also, the motivation posters were not a cat hanging on a branch. It was people rowing a boat together. Teamwork. It's trees cross-pollinating in a field. Collaborate. Or people holding hands skydiving. Okay. This was the message. Work in groups equals success. Collaboration equals success. So when it comes to communication now, millennials don't really like to be told exactly what to do. They don't want to be told what the answer is. They want to be a part of the conversation to reach the solution. This is really important in working with millennials and also in marketing to them as well. Keep in mind that for life stage, a lot of millennials right now are taking care of young kids, also taking care of aging parents. So they're a little bit stressed out from time to time. And they also like efficiency like Gen Xers, but in a slightly different way. Okay, so as a whole, collaborative, innovative, purpose-driven, socially conscious, appreciate experiences. When you're building a relationship with this group, be authentic. Be authentic, informal. That kind of communication will go much longer with them than if you try to be this really formal person. Like if there's a structure, if there's a script, if we know we're talking to AI, millennials are going to check out. They do prefer direct communication. They don't want a compliment sandwich, but the direct communication that Gen Xers tend to lead into, it might be too abrasive sometimes for millennials. That care piece is important to be paired with it. And then finally, you need to customize the relationship. This is part of that relationship development with millennials is that they want to know, talking to a real person, you're not just going to say that because so and so liked it, I'll like it too. Get to know me first and then give me a solution. So when you're connecting, make sure to customize. This is the number 2 tip in remembering 3 tips. Customize your communication. It's important for millennials in a massive way. It's important across all generations, but I'm highlighting it with millennials for a reason. Some ways to do this with your coworkers, and you have access to this information, but you can create a working with me cheat sheet. So when people work with you, answer these questions. What is your biggest working pet peeve? What do you do that annoys other people? What is the most effective way for you to receive feedback? What helps you avoid stress? What's essential for people to know when working with you? Answer these questions and then share it with your team and make it a conversation and have them answer these questions too. Also, part of being authentic, right now, 54% of LinkedIn posts are AI generated. So I want you to think of the fingerprint rule. This is from Erica Duan. She's really, really smart, has lots of great things to say. I recommend following her work. But one thing she says is to sign work with your personality, not just your name. Before you hit send, ask, is there anything here that only I could have written? Because in a world where everything sounds the same, being yourself is your greatest advantage. So I like to think of this sometimes if it feels like it's overly formal, like we have to be Robert, right? Or like you have this, like you have to be Stephanie, like you have to have your full name and be really structured and really polished. No, be Bob, be Steph, be the informal, real human being. That is what builds relationships. Okay, let's talk about Gen Z. A common sound every Gen Zer know.
Okay, I'm bored in the house and I'm in the house bored. Bored in a house and I'm in a house bored. Bored in a mug.
If you are familiar with that sound, you know why it cut off right there. But this is from a TikTok in 2020. This is a generation shaped by COVID, and that took off. So let's talk about this generation. Gen Z, where you were when moments, there are so many for this group, and they are still coming of age. So there's a combination of different ones. COVID-19 is a pretty big one that most people can remember. And when we think about, this generation that has seen so much, that has had access to so much media, more than any other generation before, has only really lived in a time of pretty tense political, whether it doesn't matter what side you are on. I think most people can agree that it's been a pretty tense political time for this generation in difference to generations in the past. And there's a lot that this group has been through. So one thing I want to point out is that this is the group of digital natives. They are not explorers. They have had access to that technology from an extremely young age. And so when we think about how that impacts them today at work and what you need to know about it is, of course, Gen Zers can use technology easily. They can teach other people about technology. They can use it in ways that other generations do not understand. Okay. Like that's an obvious one. And it doesn't mean it's the only way they like to connect. Most Gen Zers will tell you that they actually prefer face-to-face communication, that they don't want to be behind a screen when they start working with people because they know that they won't build relationships. So it's important to understand that. And that being said, more than 70% of teens, so this could be younger Gen Z, Gen Alpha, they've used AI companions, half use them regularly, and they are going to digital platforms to find answers. So 41% of Gen Zers have made a career-related decision based on TikTok advice. They are going to be meeting you, they're going to be, working with you, and they might go to TikTok to figure out what do I need to do to better interact with this person? They're searching for a job. Maybe they want to work in your company. They're going to TikTok to see what people are saying about your company. They could even be doing this for B2B information as well. Like, don't underestimate how much Gen Z is using these digital tools to find resources, to find information. Also, I want to point out that with digital, they have access to everything, to everyone. So when we think about this org chart, when we think about this idea of jump, you say, how high? Boomers, boomers said, how high? Millennials said, why? And Gen Zers say, how? Well, how do you want me to jump? Do you realize that I have access to digital solutions to tell me how to do everything? They have had access to YouTube to learn how to change a tire, to learn how to make an omelet. They have had access, it's like, I don't know how to do something. I'm just going to go online and figure out how to do it. They did not have to learn from other people in the way that other generations did. And this is affecting a lot about this generation. And I'm going to show you a TikTok that does a really good example of explaining this. And you'll be able to hear the audio. And it's really all you need to hear to understand
Okay,
it.
this is a genuine question to like older people. What did you do before you could look something up? Like, if you saw someone and you were like, oh, they remind me of that actor. What was that? What's his name? Like, and you couldn't, and none of your friends knew. Would you go to a library? Okay, without Google Maps, like I know that there was MapQuest, but before that, like genuinely, what would you do? Would you just accept not knowing? Like, I would, please stitch this and tell me, because I genuinely do not understand how I would survive.
Okay. So this might seem a little bit dramatic, but this is a comedian. So she's kind of, exaggerating a bit in how she's explaining this. But the responses to this are very funny in the TikTok. It's like, I don't know, you just didn't know. We just didn't know answers. We would pretend that we did all the time. We would be like, oh, I don't know. I think Tom Cruise starred in that movie. And then you'd go to Blockbuster and be like, just kidding. It was Nick Cage. Like, you would just not know. You would wonder. Here's what this means for work. If you are working with a Gen Zer, if you're connecting, building a relationship, and you tell them to do something, ask them to do something, they tend to want more instruction. So if you can figure out how to do something, of course, I want to know steps A, B, C, D, E to do it correctly. Where there was that sink or swim with that more kind of Gen X mindset of like just figure it out, that's not going to be successful in empowering this generation. So, giving them the step by step is one of the most important ways to build more rapport, to build a relationship if you are working with this generation, and to really empower them. And to just know that there is a specific way, or there's a kind of way that we can get this done. Here are the steps. Now, AI is a hot topic with this group right now, so I want to briefly touch on it. There is a push of Gen Z pushing back against AI for good reason. So I just want to say, like, they're not going to be necessarily the beacons of AI in a work environment. They're more hesitant towards it. So I always say just learn how they feel and then react to that in kind. It's the best way to work with and lead this generation. Okay, also a group, they had Gen X parents who were very honest, very direct with them. And, remember that the idea of a Ferris Bueller's Day Off for Gen Xers, not possible for Gen Zers. Also, a generation who was shaped by COVID. The headlines for this group, they missed out on so many opportunities as a generation, and they also really had to learn how to do things on their own, entering the workplace in a time that was drastically different. So, looking to other generations to help them learn how to do things differently. So, as a whole, this group is financially conscious, pragmatic, entrepreneurial, diverse and inclusive, and very tech savvy. If you want to connect with them, you need to be transparent. Give the how and the why behind the what. Give them that roadmap. Give them the steps A through E to set them up for success. And always remember that change is something that they are looking for. So when they bring about the idea of change, embrace that potential. Now, I'm going to leave you with this like very real truth in Gen Z. They follow people, not institutions. So they're not going to work harder because their project manager says to do it, because their leader says to do it. They won't go above and beyond just because they need to do it. But they will show up when their team counts on them. They will stay late when people need them. They really care about that human piece. So relationships, not rules, are the way to motivate and work with and engage this generation. Okay, let's talk about next steps. When we're thinking about what you need to do to bring this conversation forward, there is a summary of all of the steps. I told you I'd give you specific takeaways, but remember the top three. If you're going to remember three things, stay curious, operate by the platinum rule. Number two, customize your communication. And number three, assess how you're approaching and communicating with team members and customers through a generational lens, and ask yourself what needs to change. All right. So with that, remember, you can still put questions into the chat. I will answer those. And I just want to say thank you very much for the time. I'm excited to bring this to you. I'm excited to have more conversations, and I will pass this back to Ralph.
Wow. That was very good. Now you folks are wondering why we have a three-part series. Now you know. Thank you so much, Hannah. That was outstanding. I mean, really, I can't put it into words, and I've seen it a half a dozen times, and I still am just absolutely amazed with how much information, valuable information, and applicable information that's on there. On behalf of everyone at Supply Chain Brain Media and the Global Supply Chain Marketing Group, we just want you to know how much we appreciate you, your expertise, your insights, your perspective with the community, the fact that you're doing this for this community. We'd also like to thank today's audience. We know you guys are busy. We know how much you have going on. And, we're grateful for you because we do believe in the professional development. The Global Supply Chain Marketing Group was put together as a result of supply chain marketing professionals and the folks they serve getting together and saying how important it was for us to have more information available. And with that in mind, Hannah has graciously provided additional resources for you with her contact information right here and how to get more resources. And please know you're going to get this in an email since you did register for this. So don't worry if you don't have a chance to get it right now. So the question is, what's next? Which is a great question. The next thing that's going to happen is we're going to talk about what is trending. And our next session will be the workforce trends you need to embrace so you don't fall behind. In this session, what Hannah's going to do is unpack some of today's most talked about workplace trends, from quiet quitting to things like the career cushioning, exploring what that really means for leaders, culture, engagement, the future of work. So please know you want to sign up for that. And I do have that available to you. Let me bring that up for you so that you have that. There we go. We have a QR code that we're going to provide to you. And again, now remember, you don't have to snap the QR code if you don't have the time right now, because I will be sending this to you in a URL. But here is the QR code if you do want to sign up now. It is the trends in the workforce. You don't want to fall behind. Please sign up for that. You'll get more information on the registration page. And with that, Hannah, once again, I just want to say thank you so much for everything that you've done. It's so appreciative. Thank you for being a part of the Global Supply Chain Marketing Group. We appreciate your support. We appreciate your engagement. And thank you again to the audience. And until the next time we see all of you folks, may your next 12 months be your best year ever.